Alright guys, how are we doing today? This lecture is going to cover modules 17 and 18. So for these for both of these modules, we're going to look at the aggregate demand and the aggregate supply curve. We're going to kind of break them apart, and in the first part of this lecture for module 17, we're going to learn about aggregate demand. If your textbook will have aggregate demand all module 17, module 18 will be all about aggregate supply. So I'm going to lecture on both things, but if you wanted to look back in your book, it's actually two separate modules. We're kind of combining into one just for simplicity's sake for this class. So the first one, we're going to look at aggregate demand curve, talk about what the wealth effect is and the interest rate effect, and how those things impact aggregate demand, and identify other factors that can shift the demand curve. All right. Now, the aggregate demand curve shows the relationship between the aggregate price level and the quantity of aggregate output demanded by households, businesses, the government, and the rest of the world. Essentially, what the aggregate demand curve shows us is, hold on, let me get my pen to turn on. Okay. Aggregate demand, think of the components of GDP. So we're talking about consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and then net exports. Alright. Now, the aggregate demand curve is going to be downward sloping, so let me take care of this real quick. Oops, wrong button. Okay, so sorry about that. This is what the aggregate demand curve is going to look like. On the y-axis, we are going to have our price level. Alright, you'll see me from this point forward abbreviate this as PL. On the x-axis, we are going to have real GDP. And hopefully we can draw a better horizontal curve than what I drew there. And your aggregate demand curve is going to be downward sloping, very similarly to how the demand curve on a supply and demand graph was downward sloping. Okay, basically what this is saying is that as price level drops, aggregate demand increases. See how that works? Okay. Now, why is it downward sloping? Well, the first thing is the wealth effect of a change in the price level. So basically, when things get cheaper, people will be able to purchase more because their purchasing power will go up. If things get more expensive, then the reverse is true, and people are not going to be able to buy as many things. All right. The second is the interest rate effect of a change in the aggregate price level. Higher aggregate price level reduces the purchasing power of households' money holdings, leading to a rise in interest rates and a fall in investment and consumer spending. So basically, if interest rates go up, aggregate demand is going to decrease because it's more expensive to borrow money. And if interest rates go down, that's going to increase aggregate demand. We're going to talk more about that when we talk about monetary policy in the next unit, but it's still good to go ahead and learn that now. All right. Now, the following things will shift the aggregate demand curve. It'll shift because of a change in expectations, change in wealth, stock of physical capital, government policies, and fiscal policy, and monetary policy. So we're going to learn more about fiscal policy in a later module. I believe it's module 20 off the top of my head, but don't hold me to it. Monetary policy is something we'll cover more in detail in the next unit. So what this is showing here is going to be a change in expectations. So this is an example of Black Friday shopping. And so because it's Black Friday, people are out looking for deals. I mean, look at the picture here. You've got, this lady right here. She, all she got was a silly old vacuum cleaner, but what she really wanted here very clearly was Lucky Ducks, right? So she's jealous of this person's excellent shopping trip at Target. Because we expect things to be cheaper on Black Friday, there's usually a lot of shoppers. So that's kind of an example there of that. Change in wealth, if people get wealthier, they're going to buy more stuff. It's going to increase aggregate demand. If they get less wealthy, then the opposite is true. The stock of physical capital, that's just if businesses are building up their inventories. All right, so if you ever see this, that's just a fancy word for inventories. So if inventories increase, right? Businesses are investing more money in building up their inventory. If they decrease, then the opposite is true. All right, now you'll notice basically here you'll notice on your notes that I have 3 places for you to draw aggregate demand curve. Go ahead and draw what an increase in aggregate demand would look like, which is what this this graph right here shows you. So it's going to be just a shift to the right, very similar to when we did supply and demand and the production possibility curve. A decrease in aggregate demand is going to cause a leftward shift of the aggregate demand curve. All right, it's very important that you understand that you follow that. So draw each of those in. So the first one will just be a regular aggregate demand curve. The second one is going to be an increase. The third one is going to be a decrease in aggregate demand curve. All right, and there are some examples there. All right. So that's all for Module 17. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up Module 18 here. And in case you didn't realize this, Module 18 is going to cover the aggregate supply curve. There's actually 2 aggregate supply curve. One is the long-run aggregate supply. The other is the short-run aggregate supply. You'll notice this picture here shows robots building some stuff in a factory. So aggregate demand was people buying stuff. So consumers purchasing things, businesses buying things, governments buying things. Aggregate supply, on the other hand, is going to be more of businesses making things. All right, so both of those put together is what makes the aggregate demand aggregate supply curve. So let's take a look at that. Now, the aggregate supply curve shows the relationship between the aggregate price level and the quantity of aggregate output in the economy. All right. So the short-run aggregate supply curve is upward sloping because nominal wages are sticky in the short run. Basically, what that means is that they are slow to change. Okay, so a higher aggregate price level leads to higher profits and increased output in the short run. So if the price level goes up, that means that businesses are going to start trying to make more stuff. We'll get more into sticky wages here in a second. The nominal wage is the dollar amount of the wage paid. Okay, so that's like if you make $10 an hour, that's your nominal wage. If you make $50 an hour, that's your nominal wage. Sticky wages are nominal wages that are slow to fall even in the face of high unemployment and slow to rise even in the face of labor shortages. So think about your all's jobs. If you have them, you probably get raises. Maybe if you're lucky, once a quarter. Most cases, though, for most companies at your all's level, it's usually every 6 months or even a year. Usually the past 4 years I've gotten a raise, but it's only at the end of the school year, and it only takes in effect the following school year. So, raises don't happen as much even when times are good. And same thing at your company. Just because your restaurant gets busier for 1 month, if you work in that restaurant, doesn't mean that you're automatically going to get a raise. All it means is that your restaurant's doing well, and if it continues, maybe you get a raise, but it doesn't happen automatically. Just like if business slows down for a month, doesn't mean you automatically get a pay cut as well. So it kind of works both ways. All right. Now you'll notice here that the aggregate supply curve is upward sloping. So let me take care of this, and then we'll draw it. Okay, so this is what we are going to draw when we draw our aggregate supply curve here. So the first one, we're just going to draw a normal aggregate supply curve. So once again, we're going to have our price level on the y-axis, our real GDP. All right, and then this here, we're going to label this as our short-run aggregate supply curve for now. In the future, you'll usually see me just simply label this as AS. It's kind of funny. So it's upward sloping because as prices increase, businesses are going to produce more stuff because they can earn a higher profit in the short run. Okay. Now, just like with aggregate demand, if there's a leftward shift of the short-run aggregate supply curve, it's going to go to the left. It's a decrease in aggregate supply. If there's a rightward shift, that means there's an increase in the short-run aggregate supply. All right. Now, these are the things that will shift the short-run aggregate supply curve. All right. Changes in inflation, commodity prices, nominal wages or productivity. So a commodity is a standardized input that is bought and sold in bulk quantities such as oil, coffee, and copper. So if the price of oil goes up, that means that the price of gasoline goes up, and it makes it more expensive for businesses to produce stuff because gasoline is such an important input. So if those inputs go up, then that does have a very dramatic impact on businesses. Wages have a large impact on businesses because that's a business's most expensive thing is usually its labor costs. So they spend the most money on is paying people to work there. So, you know, if wages go up and they have to start paying more, then they're probably going to start making less stuff because they're going to eventually have to fire people because they're not going to be able to keep them around. And we'll go over that more in detail in class. But these are the things that will shift the short and aggregate supply curve. Now, the picture here is a picture of what how expensive gas was at a certain point in the United States fairly recently. You know, maybe you guys remember when you were little kids, but you know, maybe not, because you know, who pays attention to gas prices when they're 6 years old? But when I was starting to drive in 2006, 2007, gas was about, it started off at like I remember when I got my license, it was like $3.75 a gallon, and then it got all the way up to the following summer. I think $4.95 was the most I ever paid. And I lived in Kentucky, so I wasn't like living in California or something crazy like that. So it just kind of shows you how, you know, and when gas was that expensive, I mean, it really had an impact on businesses because, you know, they had to pay fuel costs and shipping costs. I remember a lot of fast food restaurants did away with their dollar menus and things like that because they couldn't make any money because it was too expensive to ship those foods to the restaurants. They just couldn't make money on it. So, you know, it had a huge impact across the economy when gas was that expensive. There's some more examples of what happens, you know, when you know, things change if it causes a shift to the right or the left. All right, now the long-run aggregate supply curve shows a relationship between the aggregate price level and the quantity of aggregate output supply that would exist if all prices and wages were fully flexible. Think of the long-run aggregate supply curve as being equal to the potential real GDP of an economy. All right, now, just like you know, anything with potential, the potential is like kind of where it should be. Now, it's possible for an economy to be above its potential, meaning that it's doing almost too well. We'll kind of define that more in the next module, what that is. But it's also possible for an economy to be doing worse than its potential. So just kind of something to think about there. The long-run aggregate supply curve, in fact, you should draw this on the back of your page here. I'll draw it on this one here so I don't have to delete anything. The long-run aggregate supply curve, maybe draw this larger, obviously, than what I'm drawing on here, is simply going to be vertical because it's at a fixed point of a potential real GDP. All right. Now, it is possible, or here's a good chart here. You don't have to draw this anywhere, but that kind of shows you actual aggregate output versus potential output from 1989 to 2013. I think this is pretty interesting. You can kind of see in the blue where we exceeded potential, other areas where we're kind of right at potential, and then other areas where we drop drastically off of our potential. You know, particularly if we look at it, you know, right here, starting in 2008, 9, there's a huge output gap there between potential and our actual aggregate output. So, yeah, we'll talk more about why that's a big deal here in a minute. So we're not going to worry about that, and we're not going to worry about that. Okay, so that's it. So just watch this, take notes, and I will see you guys in class. Thanks, bye.